This disturbing assortment of cabin stories might just give you a phobia of those seemingly peaceful wooden structures and rustic scenes. Enjoy these allegedly true and scary cabin stories, accompanied by the ambient sounds of a cabin interior during a rainstorm. The following stories come from episodes 12 and 13 of Camping Horrors, one of the podcasts I host. This show focuses on camping and hiking horror stories. Enjoy, and if you like what you hear, follow and rate Camping Horrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and send me your scariest true camping and hiking stories at darkstories.org. Now, throw a log on the fire, because the night is still young. What She Saw, from Calvin Out. It was the summer after my freshman year of high school when my family decided to take a vacation to Yellowstone National Park. We'd rented a rustic cabin in the woods just outside the park borders. I remember clearly being excited to spend a week surrounded by nature and trees instead of concrete and cars. As an avid reader, I planned to spend most of the trip curled up on the cabin porch, devouring my books. The day we arrived at the cabin, the sun was high overhead, casting dappled shadows across the dirt driveway. My parents and my younger sister, Amy, piled out of our SUV while I grabbed our bags from the back. The cabin owner, an elderly man named Walter, hobbled over to greet us. After introductions, Walter led us inside the two-bedroom cabin. It was quaint, with wood-paneled walls, patchwork quilts, and a stone fireplace in the main living area. The musty smell inside reminded me of my grandparents' basement. Walter showed us around, pointing out the small kitchen, bathroom, and bedrooms. "Well, I think that covers everything," he said, rubbing his wrinkled hands together. "You folks need anything, just give me a holler. My house is just a mile down the road." We thanked him as my dad handed over a check for the week's stay. Walter pocketed it and shuffle-stepped toward the front door. But before he left, he turned back to us with a strange look in his pale blue eyes. "One more thing," he said in a low voice. "I suggest you folks stay inside after the sun sets. These woods ain't quite right at night, if you catch my drift." My dad chuckled uncomfortably. We're city folk, Walter. I think we can manage." Walter nodded slowly, his gaze drifting over each of us. "Oh, I'm sure you can. Just keep the doors locked and curtains drawn after dark. You'll be wanting to stay inside, trust me. Well, you folks enjoy your holiday now." With that ominous warning lingering in the air, Walter exited the cabin, leaving the four of us staring at each other. "What a kook," my mom said with a nervous laugh. My sister Amy looked uneasy, her brown eyes wide. "I'm sure he was just joking around, trying to scare us," my dad offered, though he didn't sound convinced. "Come on, let's get unpacked and figure out some activities for the week." We busied ourselves putting clothes and supplies away in the old oak dressers and cabinets. The odd encounter with Walter soon faded from my mind as I daydreamed about spending the week reading out on the porch swing. As the sun began to set, we cooked some hot dogs and beans over the crackling fire as I tore through pages of The Divide by Elizabeth Kay. The howls of coyotes echoed in the distance as we laughed and talked over the snaps and pops of the flames. Full and content, I said goodnight and retired to the room I was sharing with Amy. Amy was already there, curled up under the covers of the twin bed closest to the door. I quietly changed into pajamas, then switched off the bedside lamp between our beds. Moonlight filtered in through the curtained window, creating shadows that swayed gently in the night breeze. Somewhere out in the dark forest, an owl hooted. The call was soon answered by the forlorn cry of a coyote. I rolled over, closing my eyes. I felt myself beginning to drift off. But just as sleep was about to overtake me, a bizarre sound pierced the night. A sort of drawn-out wail or howl that seemed to waver and warble unnaturally. My eyes shot open, now fully awake and alert. The odd howling sounded again, even closer and louder than before. It clearly came from somewhere right outside in the woods surrounding the cabin. I sat up slowly, glancing over at Amy's bed. She appeared to still be sleeping soundly. I then turned my attention to the window behind me. I noticed the curtains there were still partially open. I thought about getting up to close them, but a feeling of dread kept me pinned beneath the covers. The unearthly howling and wailing continued at sporadic intervals. With each eerie cry, a cold knot of fear grew inside my chest. I didn't dare peek out between the curtains. I was terrified I might see something peering back at me from the dark tree line. At some point during the chilling chorus of sounds, I realized Amy was no longer in her bed. How could I have not noticed her get up? Had I fallen asleep at some point? Heart pounding, I squinted through the moonlight at her empty, disheveled sheets. Slowly, I shifted my gaze to the center of the room. A small gasp escaped my lips. Amy stood there, staring blankly out the window through the opening in the curtains. I stared at her silhouette, my heart drumming loudly in my ears. She was standing unnaturally still, arms hanging limply at her sides. "Amy?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the ongoing wails from outside. She gave no indication of hearing me. I said her name louder. "Amy!" But she remained frozen in place, her gaze fixed on some point through the partially open curtains. The terrible cries rose and fell again and again, sending shivers up my spine. Swallowing down my fear, I slowly peeled back the covers, sliding my legs off the bed. The wooden floor was like ice against my bare feet. I took a tentative step toward my sister. "Amy, can you hear me?" I asked, my voice quivering. Still no response. As I crept closer, I could see Amy's face illuminated in the silvery moonlight. Her eyes were open, but glazed over and vacant. It was like she was in some kind of trance. I followed her stare out toward the woods, but all I could make out was darkness and swaying branches. The awful wailing erupted again, louder than before. I flinched, the hairs on my arms standing at attention. Fighting every survival instinct urging me to flee, I closed the remaining distance and reached for my sister's rigid arm. "Amy, say something, you're freaking me out." Before I made contact with her arm, Amy's head suddenly snapped towards me. I stumbled back with a gasp, her vacant eyes now piercing into me. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but then her head swiveled back around to face the window. My breaths now came in panicked gulps, my heart slamming against my ribcage. I knew I needed to get away from the window, away from whatever lurked outside in the dark forest, whatever it was that had entranced my sister. "Hey, come on, let's get back in bed," I managed to choke out. When Amy still didn't budge, I grasped her cold hand in mine. I gave her a gentle tug, and to my immense relief, she followed me without resistance. As we shuffled away from the window, the unnerving howls outside subsided, replaced by the normal night chorus of insects and owls. The knot in my chest finally loosened once we were back at our beds. I helped Amy get under her covers, glancing anxiously at her face for any spark of awareness. But her features remained blank, her brown eyes dull and unfocused. It was like part of her mind was still standing over by that window. "Just try to sleep," I told her, as I tucked the blankets around her small frame. She said nothing, merely staring past me at the ceiling. Exhaustion beat at my mind and body, but I knew rest would not find me easily tonight. Moving quietly, I closed the curtain fully, shutting out the moonlight. The room was abruptly cast into inky blackness. I crawled back into bed, my icy feet seeking warmth beneath the sheets. Pulling the covers up to my chin, I lay there staring into the void, straining to hear any sound from Amy's side of the room. But besides the pounding of my heart, all was silent. Eventually, I drifted off into a fretful sleep, my slumber plagued by screeching cries and vacant eyes. I jolted awake just as the first muted light of dawn crept across the ceiling. For a moment, I just lay there, listening. But no wailing cries pierced the morning stillness, just a few chirping birds from the surrounding forest. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up slowly, casting a cautious glance toward Amy's bed. Relief coursed through me at the sight of her sleeping form, blankets rising and falling rhythmically with her breath. The empty, trance-like stare from last night was gone. Her face was relaxed and peaceful. I wondered if she even remembered what happened. As I got dressed and prepared for the day, I mulled over whether to tell my parents about the bizarre events of the previous night. Would they just brush it off like we did with Walter's initial warning? Should I talk to Amy first and find out what she saw or experienced? In the end, I decided to wait and observe my sister's behavior when she woke up. If she seemed confused or scared, then I would tell our parents something frightening had happened. But if Amy acted normal, I thought it best not to rehash the unnerving experience. I sat on the living room sofa, watching the shadows retreat across the yard as the sun rose higher in the sky. The whole forest now appeared tranquil and inviting. It was hard to imagine the haunting sounds which echoed between the trees just hours before. I hoped that whatever occurred last night was just an isolated incident, that the remainder of our vacation would be peaceful and uneventful. I tried to act normal as Amy eventually emerged from the bedroom, hair a mess from sleep. She gave me a quizzical look as I watched her shuffle to the bathroom. "Oh, what?" she mumbled through a yawn. I shook my head, relief flooding through me. "Nothing. Sleep okay?" She shrugged absently before disappearing behind the bathroom door. When she rejoined us in the cozy kitchen for breakfast, I studied her closely for any signs of that vacant stare or unease from the previous night. But she seemed her usual cranky morning self, slumped over a bowl of cereal. So I guessed I wouldn't be mentioning anything about the strange events, unless she did first. After eating, Amy planted herself on the living room sofa to watch cartoons, while my parents discussed possible hikes for the day. I mumbled something about going for a walk, and slipped out the front door unnoticed. I brought one of Darcy Coates' horror novels with me, one of her many ghost stories, can't remember which. The morning sun filtered brightly through the trees, warming the ground and raising the birdsong a few decibels. I followed a narrow trail away from the cabin, fallen pine needles and twigs crunching under my sneakers. The surrounding forest appeared perfectly normal, no traces of the ominous noises that pierced our dark hours. I wondered if somehow it had just been a bizarre dream, or a figment of my imagination. Then again, the vivid image of Amy's blank stare and rigid form refused to fade from my mind. Lost in thought, I didn't pay much mind to where my feet carried me until the trees began to thin. I emerged from the forest onto a deserted dirt road that stretched onward through the woods in either direction. Glancing back, I realized how far I'd wandered from the cabin. I considered turning around, but curiosity nudged me forward down the road. Around a bend, a weathered wooden fence came into view, with a crooked hand-painted sign which read, "No trespassing, private property." I paused, peering through the fence slats. There appeared to be a small overgrown pasture on the other side. Deciding I wasn't technically trespassing from the road, I continued on. That's when I first noticed the trees. Every towering pine and spruce that bordered the pasture was marred with strange markings. It looked as though some massive beast had raked its claws vertically down each trunk, stripping away chunks of bark. I ran my hand over one of the gashes, feeling the sticky sap left behind. Unease trickled down my spine as I hurried farther down the road to inspect the other trees. All of them bore similar claw marks, with no discernible pattern or purpose. It was as if something had wandered through the forest, indiscriminately shredding every tree within reach. I backtracked away from the disturbing sight, skin prickling as though I was being watched. When I was once again surrounded by undisturbed nature, I left the road and pushed deeper into the dense forest. The sunlight barely penetrated through the clustered evergreens, blanketing the ground in murky shadows. Every snapping twig made my heart jolt as I forged ahead aimlessly, until suddenly I stumbled into a small clearing. I froze. Makeshift wooden structures encircled the area, fashioned from twisted branches and some sort of cord. Crude symbols and shapes adorned the structures, though I couldn't decipher any meaning from them. In the center sat a small altar-like pile of rocks, topped with bundles of feathers, beads, and bones. The entire bizarre scene exuded an aura of dark, primal energy that seemed to hum in the air and tingle against my skin. Suddenly, I felt like an intruder, trespassing on something ancient, something malignant. I backpedaled from the clearing, urged on by the suffocating sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Only when the strange structures were far behind me did I stop to catch my breath. I leaned a palm against a sturdy pine. A shudder passed through me as I imagined what sort of twisted creature, or person, could have constructed those things. The normal forest sounds of bird call and wind seemed muted, replaced by a heavy silence. I couldn't shake the certainty that something uncanny lingered out here, just out of sight. I arrived back at the cabin winded and on edge, hoping I appeared less unnerved than I actually felt. My dad raised an eyebrow at my disheveled state as I hurried past him to wash up. Over lunch on the porch, my parents discussed visiting Old Faithful the next day. When there was a lull in the conversation, I hesitantly described the odd markings I'd found in the woods. My dad frowned while my mom suggested it was just wildlife or kids messing around. "Well, I think it's best if we all stay close to the cabin today," said Dad, tone casual but firm. I met Amy's gaze from across the table, an unspoken awareness passing between us. She knew the cabin grounds were no longer a safe haven. We both did. We were intruders here, and something ancient and watchful lurked just beyond the tree line, waiting for the cloak of night to descend once more. We spent the rest of the afternoon playing board games on the cabin floor, but I couldn't focus on anything besides the approaching nightfall. An undercurrent of dread flowed through our forced conversations and half-hearted laughter. As daylight gradually faded outside, our words trailed off entirely, replaced by strained silence. Once dusk settled around the cabin, like an oppressive shroud, my dad stood up to draw the living room curtains. I watched him check the lock on the front door twice before retiring with my mom to their bedroom. Back in our room, Amy and I lay side by side in tense stillness, ears straining in the dark. The comforting sounds of our parents preparing for bed in the next room gradually went quiet. I thought about asking Amy if she wanted to talk about yesterday, to see if she would open up about her eerie trance by the window. But fear kept me mute, words frozen in my throat. Eventually, Amy's breath slowed into the steady tempo of sleep. I tossed and turned restlessly, unable to silence my racing mind. Each minute that ticked by on the glowing bedside clock filled me with increasing dread as the witching hour approached. Around 1 a.m., an unearthly howl pierced the stillness. I jolted upright, my heart lurching. The wailing cry was soon echoed by another and another. The bizarre chorus rose and fell in erratic undulations, filling the night. My eyes instinctively flicked toward the window, but this time, the curtains were tightly drawn. I realized Amy must have done that earlier, while I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed. The awful sounds swelled outside, inhuman voices layered upon each other in a cacophony I'd never heard before in nature. I imagined hordes of creatures moving stealthily between the trees, features obscured in shadow as they crept closer to our cabin, called by some ancient rite. But nightmare suddenly became reality. A tall humanoid silhouette glided past the bedroom window outside, briefly blocking the scant moonlight seeping out from behind the heavy drapes. I froze, skin erupting in goosebumps. Something was right outside. The silhouette lingered by the glass for several heartbeats before slowly continuing past, its misshapen head seeming to turn toward the window as it slid out of view. Hot tears of panic welled in my eyes as the phantom shape faded back into the night. I slowly turned towards Amy. As expected, she was sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes round, filled with terror in the darkness. Anguished sobs racked her body, her hands clamped tightly over her ears. She was even so terrified, I could see her drawing blood from where her nails dug into her skin. Amy, it's okay, you're okay," I whispered urgently, helplessness and guilt swirling within me. She remained locked in her mute nightmare, writhing silently against some invisible demon. Swallowing down my own fear, I stumbled over to her bed and wrapped her in my arms. She struggled, head shaking back and forth, refusing to fully resurface into reality. I choked back tears of my own as I gripped her tightly. "Amy, it's me, your brother, I'm right here," I murmured like a mantra, rocking us gently as the hateful cries raged outside. Eventually, I think it worked. She went still, rigid in my embrace, no longer fighting. Even so, her small frame continued to tremble. We stayed huddled together as the wailing gradually faded back into silence. Exhaustion overtook me as the adrenaline drained away, and I gave in to sleep. I was startled awake sometime later at this rattling sound. Blurry eyes searched the room before identifying the noise. It was the doorknob to our bedroom, slowly twisting back and forth. Someone or something was trying to get in. Still holding on to Amy, barely breathing, I watched the old brass knob rattle ominously, but the door itself stayed firmly closed. After an agonizing minute, the rattling ceased. Heavy footsteps moved past our room, creaking down the hallway toward the living room. The front door groaned open, a winter chill spiderwebbing across my skin. The footsteps paused on the threshold. Then it left, disappearing into the night, the door remaining open. Only then did I fully comprehend how close we'd come to a horrible fate. Some sort of creature or intruder had made its way inside the cabin during the night because someone hadn't closed the door completely. Luckily, it found itself barred from entry to our bedroom. If that bedroom door had not been locked, I don't know what would have happened. Thankfully, my parents' bedroom door was locked too. Terrible visions of them being slaughtered in their own beds flashed through my mind. There would be no more sleep for me that night as I clung to my sister, grappling with the bleak knowledge that a flimsy door with an even flimsier lock was all that stood between us and this unspeakable horror that roamed from the woods and into our cabin. The next morning, a feeling of gloom hung over the cabin. We all picked at our breakfast in silence, eyes downcast. The cheerful morning light filtering through the windows seemed to mock the despair that had settled upon us during the dark hours of the night. As soon as the sun had risen, my dad went outside to start packing up the car. His face was pale when he came back in, but all he would say was that we were leaving as soon as possible. My mom fluttered around, tidying things with trembling hands before tossing the last few items into our suitcases. I could tell she was on the verge of tears, but was fighting to hold herself together. Amy sat curled up on the sofa, gaze unfocused. She had not said a word all morning. I wished I could comfort her somehow, convince her she was safe now. But the light of day did not feel like sanctuary anymore. There really was no escape from what happened last night. Within an hour, the car was loaded up and idling in the driveway. I took one last look around the cozy cabin that had become our cage, our fragile shelter from the darkness. Part of me wanted to beg my parents to stay, thinking maybe things would be better now, but I knew deep down that we were right to flee this place and never return. The drive home was solemn and silent. Amy slept fitfully in the back seat while I stared listlessly out the window. Now that we were away from danger, my mind churned with questions. What were those creatures that prowled the woods, making those sounds? Why did they target us? And what would have happened if it had gotten in our rooms? Worst of all was the vacant, tortured look in Amy's eyes whenever the creatures came and howled. I shuddered to imagine what nightmarish visions she must have glimpsed through that window. What evil did she see that had brushed her mind and left its claw marks on her sanity? Even away from that place, she was scarred in a way I could not understand. The next several days passed by in a haze. Amy stayed curled up in her bed, hardly eating or speaking, except for occasional violent nightmares that wrenched her from her sleep. My parents tiptoed around her, offering her reassurances neither they nor I believed. Our lives were irreparably ruptured. About a week after returning home, I was reading in my room when I heard the front door open and close. I looked out the window to see Amy hurrying down the street, moving with purpose for the first time since we got back. I dropped my book and raced outside. She'd made it a few blocks before I caught up, and by then we both were panting. She glanced at me when I grabbed her shoulder, but she pulled away from me and continued on. I followed at a distance. She wound through side streets and alleys. Eventually, we reached the outskirts of town, where sagging abandoned warehouses lined the train tracks. Graffiti spattered their gray walls beneath broken windows. Amy slipped through a hole in a chain-link fence and approached the nearest warehouse. I lingered by the fence, watching as she produced a lighter from her pocket and flicked it alight. In one smooth motion, she hurled the tiny flame through the nearest empty window frame. I don't know what the small flame hit, but somehow flame sprang up and engulfed the dry wooden interior. Amy's face seemed to glow in the firelight as she watched it burn. I backed away, frightened by this specter my sister had become. When the sirens eventually screamed in the distance, Amy finally turned away from the inferno and made her way back to me. Together, we snuck into the shadows and returned home. I didn't tell anyone what Amy did, because somehow it made her seem happier. She seemed to have purged some of that poison from her soul. In the following days, she seemed to come out of her catatonic state. She became more engaged with friends and family again, less prone to trance-like staring fits. I held out hope that the horrors of that cabin would fade to the past for both of us in time, but some deeper instinct warned me that the scars ran too deep for Amy. These fears were confirmed a year later when I walked in on Amy in the midst of a seizure. Her eyes rolled back, limbs flailing about. I tried to hold her still, yelling desperately for my parents. Suddenly, Amy's back arched up as she choked out a guttural scream unlike any human sound. When I looked down at her face, she seemed so far gone, Then her rigid body went limp, and she passed out. Later at the hospital, tests and screening couldn't determine what caused her episode, but I knew. Some sort of splinter of darkness, which had infested those woods, had burrowed inside Amy. In the years since, I've watched my sister struggle against that latent evil, fighting to keep it buried down in her psyche. I often consider urging Amy to discuss what horrors she glimpsed in the window that night, hoping that confessing it might offer some deliverance. But seeing the way her eyes cloud with dread at the mere mention of that time, I know better. Some memories are too dangerous to stir from their unquiet sleep, but too strong to ever fully cleanse. The only mercy I can offer my sister now is silence. Holiday Stalker, from Anonymous. This happened to me and my family on our summer holiday. I was on my holiday in Scotland. We have a big lodge there, which we stay in every year. You can walk to the hotel from there and use all of its facilities. So the thing we did every day was go swimming at the hotel. On the fourth day that we went swimming, however, we couldn't help but notice there was a rather suspicious-looking guy wearing goggles. He kept going under the water a lot. The man looked to be in his early 30s. To give you a better image of my family, there's me, my 16-year-old sister Mia, my other 10-year-old sister Martha, my aunt, and my parents. This guy started swimming underneath us and was uncomfortably close to us. My mom gave us the signal to stay away from the guy. However, he then began to swim towards us again, so we all just got out of the pool. When I got into the changing rooms, my heart sank as I saw him walk in after me. My dad had already left the changing rooms, so I got dressed as quickly as I could and walked straight out of there. When we all met outside the hotel, my little sister said she had to go to the bathroom. But as she started to walk towards it, we all saw the same man from the pool hanging around the girl's room. So my mom went with her as she was getting freaked out by this weird man. She said that once she was in there, a woman in her mid-40s walked in after her. She stood in a cubicle with the door wide open and just stared at my mom for about 10 seconds straight before shutting the cubicle door. After this, we all walked back to the lodge, but we noticed the same woman was following us just a few meters away. My family and her both went down different routes, but they all linked up eventually. We watched her from the lodge when we made it back. She seemed to just walk aimlessly between lodges. Then she turned around and started walking towards ours. After that, she walked behind the lodge next to ours. There was a large forest behind our lodge. She just walked straight into it, then was gone out of sight. Now, something I need to explain is that I've never seen anyone go into those woods behind the lodges, because I'm pretty sure they're off limits. Later on that night, we were watching TV. My older sister was in her room, when suddenly she heard a loud knocking on her windows. A quick note, her room was facing the woods. She came and told all of us what was happening, so I came over and opened the curtains for her. It was pitch dark out, and so I couldn't see anything, other than the faint silhouettes of trees. We then all checked outside with torches. Before long, my aunt swore she had found 2 sets of footprints, walking away and disappearing into the trees. When we called it a day, my dad and I went back outside to check one more time to be safe. We were shocked to find that other people in other lodges had opened their curtains and were now looking around outside too. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a helicopter overhead. It was a police chopper, and it was circling really low around the lodges. If I had to guess, they seemed to be looking for someone. We all were. My dad and I quickly got back inside and locked the doors. We put a jar on top of the door handle, so if anyone tried to open it, the jar would fall to the ground and alert everyone. Skip to the next day. My family was getting ready to leave, as it was our last day there. The house cleaner came over and started to tell us about a break-in which occurred at the lodge right next to ours. However, in a disturbing twist, it was more than just a break-in, because the people who had been staying in that cabin had been found inside, stabbed brutally to death. She said apparently a man and a woman who had been watching the people staying at the lodges were actually deciding who to burgle. But if they were just burglars, why did they have to kill those people? My family and I, to this day, still wonder about that man and woman who seem to be linked together. And even if it sounds morbid, I can't help but feel happy and lucky that it wasn't our lodge they decided to burgle. Ouija spirits summoned a skinwalker. From Rude Boy Nuka. One autumn evening, my friend and I found ourselves in the midst of an adventurous night deep in the woods. My friend's family's cabin was a shotgun-styled house with no neighbors nearby for miles. There, we decided to engage in a chilling activity, playing with a Ouija board. At the time, it was between 11:30 and 12. The darkness enveloped us as we gathered around the board, seeking contact with the supernatural. To our astonishment, the planchette on the Ouija board spelled out the name Austin, the boyfriend of the friend I was visiting. The atmosphere grew tense as we asked the spirit what it desired. With each letter it painstakingly revealed, our unease escalated. The board ominously conveyed a chilling message. For whatever reason, it wanted to kill Austin. D-I-E, it spelled out, sending shivers down our spines. Hastily, we concluded the session and said our goodbyes. The unsettling event left us craving other supernatural experiences, and our curiosity got the better of us. We devised a plan to communicate with more spirits by slipping a paper message under the door of an unoccupied room in the house. Anticipation swelled as we hoped for a response. To our astonishment, we received one. Someone wrote back on the paper. Someone once again expressing hatred towards Austin. Alarmed by this, we decided to try to cleanse the place, in a desperate bid to rid the cabin of any malevolent energy that seemed to be plaguing it. Obviously, it wasn't a good sign that whatever spirit or spirits here wanted to hurt people. At around 3:15 to 3:30 a.m., I made the decision to leave the unsettling cabin behind. My friend escorted me out to my parked car. It was only about 30 feet away from the porch of the terrifying cabin. As I began to drive, I soon arrived at a crossroads, which was about 4 miles down the road. My phone suddenly vibrated. It was a video call from my friend. I answered. Their voice seemed to be trembling, and weirdly enough, they asked if I'd come back. No, I've been gone a while now. I'm already about 4 miles down the road. To my shock, my friend proceeded to inform me that at that very moment, they could distinctly hear my voice just outside the front door, asking to be let in. In a state of confusion and disbelief, I held up my phone to reveal I was indeed in my car at the crossroads, far away from them. In an attempt to validate their claims, they positioned their phone near the front door, allowing me to hear an unsettling imitation of my own voice emanating from the other side. The voice persistently pleaded to be let in, even saying there was some danger outside in a panic, that if they weren't let in, some sort of monster was going to get them. Beyond horrified, my friend adamantly refused to open the door. However, the imitated voice grew increasingly aggressive and menacing. Multiple screams erupted, echoing through the air. It was like whatever was outside had split into multiple entities. The deceptive voice then resorted to a sinister tactic, attempting to lure my friend into the foreboding woods, mimicking my voice still and crying out for help. I sat in my car, paralyzed, helplessly listening to the entire chilling conversation unfold through my car's sound system. Before long, the voice dissipated, leaving us all confused and terrified. To this day, we don't know what that was, but we believe it happened because we dared to mess with a Ouija board. Coraline Closet Creature, from Jade H. There's a time in your life, at least once, when you feel terror. And I mean true terror, when your chest feels hot, yet also frozen on the last breath you took. Time seems to slow, your stomach becomes rigid, filling your throat with a silent scream. Maybe you run, maybe you freeze up, maybe you'll try to fight. But for those of us who have felt true terror, it becomes engraved in your bones so deep, it seems to change a part of your soul, a part of yourself. That being said, I want to tell you about November 20th of 2006. I grew up in a very Baptist Christian household, and at this time in my life, I was very young and susceptible to influence. When you're going to these kinds of things, there's talk about heaven and angels, and a lot of talk about the threat of hell, of damnation, eternal burning. That's kind of terrifying for an 8-year-old kid. Anyway, my family and I took a flight to Colorado. We'd gotten a small cabin high in the mountains, deep in the woods. We were so high up, my dad needed portable oxygen from altitude sickness. We were pretty secluded, other than the cabin next to us, about 3 acres away, though it was eerily hard to see through the snow-covered trees and foot-deep buildup of snow on the ground. Our first night was fun. We had a fire and roasted marshmallows and popcorn on long sticks. I had a good time. My 2 younger sisters and I even built a snowman. Now, the inside of the cabin was a very open build. There was a railless second-story loft with 2 twin beds, and under the stairs was our dad's bed. There was a little TV and an ugly blue floral grandma couch, which smelled like maple syrup. I slept on the left twin bed, closest to the edge and the stairs. My sister Bailey, who was 6 at the time, slept in the right, safer bed, away from the edge. Our younger sister Grace was only 2, so she slept with our dad downstairs. I slept pretty good that night. Probably the last good night's sleep I've had since, and I'm 23 now. It all started with some tapping. Early the next morning, I woke up from this annoying tapping sound. It wasn't like a pencil on a desk. It was more like the raspy clasp of something heavy and sharp, flicking its nails against the wooden floor. At first, I thought it was my dad. Honestly, I thought it could be bears too. I was a kid, and we were in the mountains after all. But I was wrong. The tap-tap-tapping, or ras-ras-rasping of that sound made me stay completely still in my bed. I had a habit of sleeping with the pillow on top of my head, so I knew I was pretty hidden. I made the decision to peek through the crack between my bed and the pillow. I looked toward the ledge, the part where someone neglected to put railing. I could see the straight drop-off to the living area and tiny kitchen. The massive windows without curtains really emphasized how alone we were in that cabin, how dark it truly is when you're miles away from city lights and protected by towering juniper and spruce. But there was something there, like a dark silhouette just on the overhang. It looked maybe like a blurred hand, just a few fingers, black in the darkness, gripping the ledge of the loft, tapping an extra-jointed finger. I froze. Nausea and chill froze my body. I held my breath. No, I thought to myself, there's no way I was seeing that. I slowly closed my eyes, and I faced away. It was gonna be daylight soon. I usually woke up around 6 a.m., so there's no way I had to wait all night for Daddy to get up and sing loudly to us, "Good morning, girls. Demons can't be real. Monsters can't be real." That's what I told myself. I mean, I was a God-fearing Christian. We sang hymns in the car every time we drove. We went to private Bible school, vacation Bible school. There's no way God would ever let that happen to me, one of his children, right? Again, I told myself this over and over, reciting Bible verses in fear, whispering words so silently they came out between breaths. Prayers and verses I thought would make it go away. In my mind, I even commanded the thing to leave me be. I didn't know any better, but I certainly do now. After what felt like hours, but was most likely a few minutes, I felt the air around me go still a bit, the tension dissipating. I got brave and peeked one eye open, as small as I possibly could. It was gone. That weird hand or whatever it was gone now. It had gone silently, and I hadn't even noticed. I breathed with relief and rolled over to face the wall beside me. There was a small wooden nightstand with an old oil lamp, but slightly hidden behind it was a small seam, like the outline of a tiny square door frame. At that time, Coraline the movie didn't exist, but now I'd say it's very close to the perfect description. The similarity to the movie in these events are astounding. This door was a dark old wooden brown, like the muddy brown color, with deep hollows dark from being burned or stained. Eventually, I fell back to sleep. Later, when the sun finally came up, I talked to my dad about the tiny door. My sisters and I hid downstairs while he investigated. Soon he called us up to come see it. It was a tiny room similar to a storage closet, with a few gallons of water and firewood inside. Nothing to worry about. Even Grace crawled inside, and Dad took a picture. The second night is where the story truly begins. I was worried about being scared again that night, so I asked my dad to leave a light on for me, so I could see during the night. He didn't like the idea that much, so instead he made a fire in the fireplace and put up the chain guard for extra protection. Then we went off to bed. The fire burned well for several hours. To be honest, I spent more time watching the shadow of the flames dance up the high triangular ceiling than I did sleeping. I wonder now, if I'd actually slept, would I have gone through any of this? Soon those flames dwindled down, from sparks and embers to a mere orange hue. I turned away, now facing that ominous tiny door. As soon as I did, I was startled by a tap. That same repetitive sound drilling into my skull once again. But it wasn't coming from behind me, it was coming from in front of me, from behind that door. I thought it was a trick. I thought it was just me imagining something, a small branch shaking just the right part of the roof so that the door snapped. There was no way a monster could come after me. I was saved and protected. And monsters aren't real. Then there was silence. I peered through my cocoon of pillows and blankets, exposing my eyes. I felt I had to see it, to see if it was something or someone. I don't really know what I was thinking. As I opened my eyes, sharp, elongated fingers pulled back between the seams of the door and frame. It somehow melted through the tiny crack like an apparition. Suddenly, the door started to shake, and a loud scratching sound grinded across the other side of the door. It was so loud, even my sister stirred a bit in bed. I could hear her. Or I hoped it was her. The sound behind the door masked it, but I felt in my soul that there was some movement, some presence behind me now. It had to be Bailey. She probably heard it too, and was going to run and tell Dad. I hoped she would. Another scraping sound, the sound of talons getting caught in each of the layers of wood. Then the fire went out. All at once, the orange halo of light that outlined the edges of the room disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark. Was my sister there? I swore I could hear movement. I convinced myself that sound was her. Then there was a bang. The door shook, and at this point I was so still in fear, my muscles cramped, and my breath was shallow. I was probably breathing in and out 20 times a minute. I tried not to breathe at all, though. Another bang. Something behind the door was knocking. It was hitting it hard, as if someone was hitting it with a fist. Bang, each time I felt myself shrivel up, becoming stiffer and stiller, as if I could shrink myself. Bang, 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 bang. The loud thuds vibrated through the air. I could almost feel my heartbeat match its rhythm. Bang, bang, bang. Would you stop it? Bailey had finally woke up. Her words were followed by silence. I hear another shift, and my bed moves. Jade, would you... Her words stopped abruptly and were followed by a deafening scream. She screamed, but I didn't move. I stayed completely still. It wasn't her that had bumped my bed. It wasn't her who I felt sitting at the edge of my feet. Whatever it was, Bailey had seen it, and it was on my bed, and it had been in that tiny closet beside me. My tears overflowed, spilling down my face even though I forced them shut. I didn't want to see that door. I didn't want to see that thing. Bang, the door was pounded on with the force of a football player trying to break it down. The wood bowed and bent from the immense power of it. Bang, bang, bang. Something inside me, something I couldn't control, caused me to start reciting Bible verses again. Through shaky breaths and shock-filled tears, I prayed. More movement on my bed. Bang, bang, bang. Then stomping came from the stairs, followed by, "What's going on up here?" My dad. My prayers had worked out, but I couldn't sigh with relief yet. I continued my desperate pleas. I couldn't keep my body completely still anymore. I was shaking. Every muscle in my body contracted at different times. I felt as if I was vibrating from fear, from the pain of my stillness, from that thing that had now slowly made its way to my side. Its claws had kept getting caught on the knitted quilt above my thick comforter. I'd felt it pull away at it a few times. Another bang. My heart sank. After that last bang, there was a change. A pop or a click. I couldn't figure out what the sound was. I looked. Two deep, sunken-in eyes, hollow and black, surrounded by what could have been a face, but it was too pale, maybe just white. A face that seemed to have no blood flowing through it. In that moment, I believed it was a demon, that the devil himself was looking me in the eye with an overgrown or maybe cut-out mouth, making it curve all the way up to the high cheekbones beside its eyes. I knew it had teeth. I could tell, and I knew they were sharp. Whatever it was, the thing smelled, and it was thin. Behind its head, I could see some sort of black hair-lined sash or coat that had been decaying over time. But those eyes, they were like craters, with dark spiraling layering in the middle. Two once human eyes, bloodshot with cat-like irises, not in the sense that they're slit, but more like the red-yellow flash they make when you shine a light into them. In a split second, it leaned away from me, taking one last pause before zipping across the room. It sounded like it leapt to the floor, but I couldn't tell. I was stuck there in shock. My eyes stared forward, just as they had been when it was there. But now that it had moved, that tiny door was in clear view. It was open, not too wide, but enough to see inside. There was a loud scuffle. My sister and Dad screamed. I still stared at the opening behind the door, and out of the darkness, two shining eyes peered back at me. My dad grunted and yelled. I could hear a thud downstairs, followed by the front door crashing down. Apparently, whatever that thing was, it had tackled my father, clawing a gash across his chest before tumbling off the edge of the loft to the floor below. The creature busted out of the door. My dad had fallen with it and was knocked out. Bailey wailed and cried. I could hear Grace downstairs in bed screaming, babbling about, "Daddy, wake up," or "Daddy, oh no." I could feel the freezing winter air blowing through the cabin, but I didn't move. I didn't blink. I stared back at those eyes. We were there for hours, Dad still unconscious, and Bailey had somehow managed to grab the radio or a phone and call for an emergency response. We were so snowed in by then, the national park nearby had to plow the road twice to get to us. One truck had somehow stopped working. They blamed the cold or maybe battery issues. I don't remember. By the time the second snowplow had made its way to our street, my two sisters had crawled into Bailey's bed with all of what was left of the blankets. They'd kept themselves going with hot cocoa powder, Cheez-Its, and a jar of peanut butter. A 2-year-old and a 6-year-old left to fend for themselves with a half-conscious dad. And there I was, their older sister, still frozen in the same exact place. I never looked away. The park rangers came in, taking off their jackets, trying to wake up our dad without much success. But he was still alive. They started a fire and placed the door in the open doorway on top of a small pile of snow that had accumulated there. When the police and ambulance finally arrived, there were helicopters flying above us. I could hear the blades chopping the air, making the tree branches snap and shake. The last thing I remember was being pulled onto a stretcher, my gaze torn away from that thing in the dark. My family and I never talk about that cabin. We don't discuss what happened that night. Now, as an adult, I'm not so religious anymore, but I still celebrate the earth and practice spirituality. I have a few ideas as to what it could have been, but it doesn't really matter. Sometimes, I still see those long, clawed fingers curled around a door frame before evaporating away. Maybe one day, I'll really find out what it is. Thank you for stopping by at our little campsite here at Camping Horrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us for narration at darkstories.org. For more narrations from me, you can catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or you can go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Dark Prevails, and be sure to leave Camping Horrors a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Now then, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.